Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. One of the many innovations that came out of the Civil War was the introduction of corps badges, which you students of the period are very familiar with, those uniquely shaped insignia worn by United States soldiers, typically on the flat part of their caps or on the front of their hats to signify the corps to which the soldier belonged. Here's an example. This is the badge of the 18th Corps, sewn to a cap worn during the war by Sergeant John Ammerman of the 139th New York Infantry. It was sold by the dealers Perry Adams Antiques, who are advertisers in Military Images magazine. And I will admit that I've made a couple of purchases for my photograph collection from Ben and Bill in the past. Now, it is well known in Civil War circles that two Union generals played important roles in the development of corps badges. The man largely credited with the idea, Philip Kearny, was the son of wealthy Irish Americans who became a career soldier. He proved his valor during the Mexican War and suffered the amputation of his left arm after a grape shot wound. That was during one of the battles of the Mexican War, and during the Civil War was killed in action during the 1862 Battle of Chantilly. The other general was Joseph Hooker, West Point class of 1837. He also made his mark during the war in Mexico, and then during the Civil War, furthered his reputation as Fighting Joe during the Peninsula Campaign and Antietam before succeeding to command of the Army of the Potomac. In this role, he expanded on Kearny's corps badge concept and, in doing so, spread esprit de corps throughout the Army. Details of the origins of the corps badge can be found in the 1884 book, Anecdotes of the Civil War in the United States. It's by General Edward Davis Townsend. Life dates 1817 to 1893. In his role as Assistant Adjutant General in Washington, D.C., the Massachusetts-born West Point 1837 graduate established himself as a consummate staff officer. His explanation of the corps badge backstory and its impact is worthy of note. I've not seen it anywhere else, and I want to share it with you. So let's begin with Townsend's explanation. He writes, as a sort of substitute for medals, the corps badges have come to be regarded, he says, as a proud mark of distinction and memorial of service in the war. It would be difficult to describe the true sentiment connected with them in more eloquent language than that used by Commander of the 25th Corps in his order announcing the device for his command. He goes on to note the description of why they were so important by that commander, who is John Gibbon. And Townsend continues, this corps, the 25th, was organized late in the war and was, for the most part, composed of veterans who had served in other corps. Major General John Gibbon, in his orders adopting the badge, says, and this is where Townsend gets to the heart of his comment, Gibbon wrote, the symbol selected is one which testifies our affectionate regard for all of our brave comrades, alike the living and the dead, who have braved the perils of this mighty conflict, and our devotion to the sacred cause, a cause which entitles us to the sympathy of every brave and true heart and the support of every strong and determined hand. The Major General commanding the Corps, this is Gibbon referring to himself in the third person, does not doubt that soldiers who have given their strength and blood to the fame of their former badges will unite in rendering the present one even more renowned than that and those under which they have heretofore marched to battle. So that's Townsend quoting John Gibbon about the importance of the Corps badge. Now, Townsend goes on to reveal the backstory that I mentioned at the top of the video. So let me continue with Townsend's anecdote. So highly are they valued, he writes, that large sums have often been expended on presentation gold and jeweled badges. Yet there seems to be one objection to these badges. There is nothing to prevent their being worn by any man who served, whether meritoriously or not, during the war. He continues, and this is where we get to the true origin story, according to Townsend. The adoption of badges appears to have originated in the Kearny patch. It's Philip Kearny. One day, when his brigade was on the march, General Philip Kearny, who was a strict disciplinarian, and I can show you his photograph here, and you can see the arm that he lost in Mexico. Anyway, Townsend continues. Kearny, who was a strict disciplinarian, saw some officers standing under a tree by the roadside. Supposing them to be stragglers from his command, he administered to them a rebuke, emphasized by a few expletives. Kearny was known for that. The officers listened in silence, respectfully standing in the position of a soldier, until he had finished, when one of them, raising his hand to his cap, quietly suggested that the general had possibly made a mistake, as they, none of them, belonged to his command. With his usual courtesy, Kearny exclaimed, "Pardon me, I will take steps to know how to recognize my own men hereafter." Immediately, on reaching camp, he issued orders that all officers and men of his brigade should wear conspicuously on the front of their caps a round piece of red cloth to designate them. This became generally known as the Kearny patch. After the Battle of Fair Oaks, or Seven Pines, it was observed that the Confederate prisoners universally wore strips of red, blue, or white cloth on their caps, which they said were to designate the commands to which they belonged. General Kearny, in conversation with General Hooker, enthusiastically instanced this as illustrating the utility of his patch. Now, pause for a moment. There you have a Confederate use of something similar to Corps badges, not badges in themselves because they're ribbons, but nonetheless, they serve the same function as being able to differentiate to which Corps or whatever your organizational principle was in which you served. Now, Townsend continues. General David B. Birney, in his General Orders number 49, dated September 4th, 1862, from the headquarters of Kearny's division, announced the death of General Philip Kearny. After the usual requirement to wear crape on the left arm for 30 days, traditional Victorian mourning tradition, the order says, to still further show our regard for him and to distinguish his officers as he wished, each officer will continue to wear on his cap a piece of scarlet cloth or have the top or crown piece of cap made of scarlet cloth. So there you've got some additional differentiation of using that scarlet patch. Remember, we're not really yet to the full-blown Corps badge. Now, Townsend continues. After the Kearny patch, several Army Corps, one by one, adopted distinctive badges. The divisions of each corps were indicated by one of the colors: red, white, blue, and green and orange if there were more than 3 divisions upon some part of the badges. And here they're borrowing from the Confederate idea at Seven Pines. They were either suspended, now they're getting back to the Union Corps, they were either suspended by the tricolored ribbon or fastened with a pin. As there were usually three divisions in a corps, the national colors were the ones sure to be represented. For the headquarters, some slight modifications were made in the form worn by the divisions. When several Army Corps were consolidated into an army, the badge of that Army headquarters consisted of a combination in one of all those of the Corps. But it is to be believed that, with the exception of the Army of the Cumberland, the Army badges were adopted by societies of several armies subsequent to the war. The badges were painted on the wagons of the Corps and stenciled on all its articles of public property. Corps badges, Townsend adds, now have a legal recognition in the revised statutes of the United States. Remember, this is vintage 1880s. Section 1227, all persons who have served as officers, non-commissioned officers, privates, or other enlisted men in the regular army, volunteer, or militia forces of the United States during the War of the Rebellion and have been honorably discharged from the service or still remain in the same shall be entitled to wear, on occasions of ceremony, the distinctive Army badge ordered for or adopted by the Army Corps and Division, respectively, in which they served. Got one more addendum, and this is where we get to Hooker. To Major General Joseph Hooker, Townsend adds, probably belongs the credit of first having issued orders for the adoption of regular Corps badges to be worn by officers and enlisted men of all the regiments of various corps throughout the entire Army of the Potomac. Just before the Chancellorsville campaign, on the 21st of March, 1863, Hooker issued a circular prescribing the device for a badge for each corps for the purpose of ready recognition of corps and divisions of the Army and to prevent injustice by reports of straggling and misconduct through mistake as to their organizations. They were to be fastened on the center of the top of the cap. The devices seem to have been arbitrarily chosen without particular significance, which explains the various shapes that I shared earlier on the chart. I'll go back to that. You can see the heart, the square, the half moon, six-pointed star, the cross. There's a bunch of different insignia. So there you've got some information about the origins of the Corps badges, the notation of Philip Kearny mistaking different Union officers as men of his command, and of course the Confederates at Seven Pines is particularly worthy of note. So thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War, a Research Trail.